Kerbal Space Program 2 had a very rocky release last month, and no, I'm not talking about the Planet from the Beyond Home Planet Pack. But yesterday, the first patch finally rolled out. It only took them a month. Was it worth it? Oh my sweet Aunt Deborah, yes it was. In this video, I'll be going over some of the changes, fixes, improvements, salads, optimizations, and new bugs that the first patch has brought, talk about the performance of the game now, and also go into what the future may hold. And if you like what you see, please consider subscribing for future updates I'll be covering. Quick disclosure before delving into this, I am running this game on a 3070 Ti with graphics set to high at 1080p. My CPU is a 9th gen i5 overclocked to 4.7 GHz, and I have 64GB 3200 MHz DDR4 RAM. Also, when talking performance, I won't be speeding up any footage, so you can see how it runs in real time. The big one, the question on everyone's minds, how is the performance after the first patch? Well, surely it can't be any worse, right? Well, I've put together this skylon here because I saw Matt's video and I thought I could make it look better. Shame it doesn't work, but with 8 Rapier engines plastered on, it's the perfect test for how well the game runs. If you aren't aware, Rapier engines and, well, any jet engines on release were notoriously bad for frames. In my air-launched Saturn V video, I was getting a massive 2 to 4 frames per second using 16 of the largest jet engines in the game. I designed this skylon before the patch and was attempting to fly it with the 8 Rapiers, and I was getting about 5 to 6 frames per second. Now with the new optimizations made in the game, I get 20. An incredible boost, 4 times the amount, which actually makes this somewhat fun to fly. Kerbal Space Program 2 is fun now? Well, there's still a long way to go, but actually over the course of this video, I'll probably be near enough addressing every complaint I had when I did my first review, but we'll get onto that. With regards to flying rockets, I only have a few concrete values for pre-patch, but that aside, it feels noticeably smoother when launching, even when moving the camera around and looking at the Space Center, which, having racked up quite a few hours in this game over the last 3 weeks, I can tell you was not exactly buttery. Hell, I wouldn't have even called it margarine. With the 50-part rocket launching from the Space Center, I now get about 26 to 30 frames per second. With 100 parts, that drops down to about 20 to 25, and using my space shuttle, which is just over 150 parts, that drops again to about 15 to 20. One thing that I did notice whilst flying this space shuttle, about 20 kilometers above the sea level into its flight, looking back at the Space Center, my frames did tank very briefly. They dropped down to 7 frames per second. However, for most of the launch it was 15 to 20, and 7 frames per second was about the maximum that I was getting pre-patch. So even though it dropped at its lowest point, it was about where I was getting before. Bigger craft will mean less frames, but a 2 to 4 times increase in the frames that I was getting pre-patch, well, that is absolutely amazing, and everything is certainly running a lot faster, even the monsters. So, vast improvements on jets and rockets. Brilliant! Space for me was never a big concern, frames-wise, unless I was looking at Kerbin, and really the only times I was getting major performance issues was around the Space Center. Now, however, one amazing upgrade is performance in the vehicle assembly building. Everything inside whilst you're constructing the 69 runs so much better than before. Everything feels snappier, smoother, and just overall a lot easier to start getting rockets designed. This was a big problem pre-patch because when you started getting some bigger designs, the frames would really drop to a crawl, and being someone that makes somewhat large rockets, this has been a massive improvement in my opinion. I do also have some values to give for some other hardware. These were taken from a PC with a 12th generation i7, an RTX 2070 as the GPU, 32GB of RAM running at 3600 MHz, and the game was being run on medium settings at 1080p. This will be my footage as I didn't receive any from the person that sent me these, just the values, but they are as follows. At the Space Center, launching a 50-part rocket with 6 engines running gave 35 to 42 frames per second. A 100-part rocket with 12 engines running gave 25 to 31 frames per second, and finally a 150-part launch vehicle with 16 engines running at the Space Center gave 21 to 26 frames per second. This is an amazing improvement, pretty much doubling or tripling frames in some cases. Now, the frames that I was getting were a little lower than what I just stated there. Now, that could be because I was running the game on high and it is more taxing on my system, but I personally believe it's because I was recording at the same time using OBS. OBS will be taking up some resources on my computer that would otherwise have been able to be given to KSP2. But yes, in order to get footage, I do need to record. Like, I can't just, yeah, it's how you record, and it does require some sort of resources to be able to run that program at the same time. But anyway, a big thanks to Nuke Guy for sending me this information and for being an amazing mod on my Discord. Cheers, man. And that about wraps up the performance, and if I'm honest, I am incredibly happy with the improvements made. Now to delve into the changes made, bug fixes, salads and more. Okay, so what changes have been made other than the optimizations to performance I've already mentioned? The short answer is lots. Seriously, I've included a link to the changelog in the description of this video because there is no way I can go through every single one of them. But I will talk about the major ones here, and if you want to check out the full patch notes, well, you know where to find them. Starting off, a simple warning message has been added to the game when it loads. Better safe than sorry. There have been some subtle changes to the UI. The colours are ever so slightly different, a tad darker by the looks of things. I personally didn't mind the old colours, but these new ones are nice too, or maybe this is just me imagining it. I've checked against the old UI and it does look a little different, but as said, it's only minor. However, the map UI definitely has changed colour quite considerably. There's lots of new fancy colours now, and overall it looks much better. The arrow to bring up Delta V has now moved to next to the staging stack, which I think is a more intuitive position to place it. The resources on the staging stack have lost their segments, which I personally think makes them easier to read. Still no thrust to wait per stage or burn times, but hey, one step at a time. The maneuver planner has had a massive overhaul. It's still the same push and pull design, but it's much easier to see what you're pushing and pulling. When you zoom out, it now stays the same size, making it much easier to adjust maneuvers whilst looking at different bodies. No, not those kind of bodies. You still can't make maneuvers while paused, but in general, with the new maneuver node layout and small features implemented, it's much nicer to plan out your journeys. More on this in the bug fixes section though. Lights now actually provide light. Previously, they didn't do much at all, providing about as much illumination as a 40-year-old lava lamp. Now you can really light up your vessels and stations and get some cracking beauty shots of them in the dark. When launching an uncrewed vessel or a vessel that has both crew and a probe core, rather than having an empty Kerbal seat in place of the probe, it will display a circuit. Only minor but a nice touch. The camera can no longer no-clip through terrain, which some of you might not like, but it makes it easier to get static shots of rockets launching, which I really enjoy. Entering a new sphere of influence, exiting or entering a planet's atmosphere, or landing on a planet's surface will have the game auto-save for you. With how much it was crashing previously, that's certainly welcome. That being said, I've not experienced any crashes so far since the patch, but I'm sure there's bound to be some eventually. Onto the VAB changes. Whenever you now save a new vessel, rather than taking a screenshot of what the camera is looking at when you save, the saved image will be a blueprint of the vessel. I know I found it quite tricky telling Skylon 4 apart from Skylon 1, 2, and 3, and 5, so this change might make it easier to find the correct craft. The center of mass, center of thrust, and center of pressure indicators are now translucent. I'm a big fan of this, as when designing Skylon, once again, that didn't work, I had those up all the time because I needed to know where they were, but not being able to see through them made it a little tricky to move parts around those locations. This is a welcome change. When building planes or anything horizontal rather than vertical, the middle mouse button will now move you horizontally rather than vertically, which is what I imagine was always intended, just not implemented until now. And those are really the big changes. As mentioned, there are far more than just this, and if you want to see them all, definitely go check out the patch notes. Oh boy, there have been some bug fixes. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen so much fixed on one page since maybe that time in the clip. Wait, hang on, no, this isn't my dear diary. Anyway, as per the last segment, I'll be going over major fixes here, but won't be listing them all. Starting off with one that may cause dismay to some. The reverse thrust crack and drive is no more. Before this patch, if you blocked an engine's exhaust, it would generate an insane amount of thrust in the opposite direction. Or so I'm told. I personally would never get up to anything that involves doing stupid things or breaking the game. But yes, this has now been patched out, but I'm sure it won't be long until a new Kraken drive is discovered. Talking of Kraken drives, docking ports have now been given a makeover. I wasn't able to test this myself due to limited time, but apparently docking force reacquisition has been toned down massively. In my shuttle station video, this caused an unexpected Kraken attack when two parts I just decoupled decided to dock together. This might make payloads behave more sensibly now, and also make orbital construction a little easier. Continuing in the same trend, a bug has been fixed where you lost control over a vessel once it was undocked. Something else I ran into, and something I'm very glad has been fixed. I did previously get around it by disabling ComNet. Now maybe I can turn that feature on again. Another bug I ran into was orbits of vessels changing constantly when not under time warp, for no reason whatsoever. This I couldn't find information on in the patch notes, but whilst playing, the game no longer did this, so I assume this was fixed, but maybe I just got lucky this time round. Another one that also appears to be fixed, but I couldn't find any info on, was uncontrolled vessels just randomly deciding they didn't want to space anymore. Maybe I just can't read, but in the 4 or so hours I played whilst filming for this video, this didn't happen to me once. Fuel now obeys crossfeed, so no longer will your upper stages be drained by your first stage engines, and decouplers actually decouple. These bugs were all rather annoying, but the next few bug fixes have been a complete game changer for me, and actually make me want to carry on playing Kerbal Space Program 2 now they've been sorted, and they're all pretty much to do with planning maneuvers. The first one, sticky orbit markers. Oh my god, I wanted this so much. In fact, so much so, it was one of the first mods that I downloaded for KSP2 in order to fix this. Pre-patch, whenever you wanted to adjust a maneuver node, if you had pinned an orbit marker, it would unpin as soon as you selected the maneuver. This is no longer the case, and makes fine-tuning intercepts and encounters possible without a billion different clicks. This fix has made interplanetary travel much more feasible, something I would quite like to do a lot of in KSP2. But talking of interplanetary travel, previously whenever you plotted a maneuver that entered another body's sphere of influence, your trajectory just flat out disappeared. You were really flying blind and had no idea if you'd be 10 kilometers away from the surface of Juna or 10,000 kilometers. This has now been fixed, and we can actually see that the burn we just performed will unfortunately, or maybe happily for some of you, give us a direct impact. Or, well, we can see just how close to the planet we're going to end up. These two fixes together certainly make interplanetary travel not only feasible now, but actually somewhat enjoyable. And finally, we can now see just how long in seconds a maneuver will take before we start it. Gone are the days of blasting your engine and overshooting when you only had a burn that would last less than a second. Yeah, these changes are great for getting anywhere. And I mean, that's the whole point of the game, right? Right? Once again, if you want to see all the fixes, check the patch notes. There are many, many more. Just be warned, War and Peace was a shorter read. If I'm honest, many of the bugs I've run into have now been fixed. I'm sure there are others that need fixing, but this is from my personal experience and what has been said by the developers. In order to improve optimization, changes to the runway lights had to occur. I've not seen this yet, but apparently now from a distance, the lights are quite difficult to spot. The devs are working on making this better though. Another new bug, or well, I'm not sure if it's a bug or a feature, is that when hiding the UI by pressing F2, more affectionately known as screenshot mode, the time warp bar remains. Not the end of the world, but it did make it annoying to get the thumbnail for this video. And lastly, a couple of issues still with the pause button, like being spammed by a million pause unpause messages whenever you do pause and unpause. Oh, and also sometimes moving down to normal speed from high time warp will now pause the game and won't let you unpause unless you press the dedicated button for it. Small gripes, but yeah, still bugs that are present. Yes, this patch does not seem to have broken any of the mods I had running prior to the update. I did remove community fixes though because I wanted to check that sticky orbit markers were now in the base game. That being said, I am aware Space Warp has had a new release, and I'm sure many other mod makers are currently working furiously to update their mods for this new version of the game. That, however, will all be covered on my next mod video next Wednesday. There are many other issues resolved in this patch that I've not really gone into, things like fixes for joint rigidity on engine plates, multiple other bug fixes and additions, but I intended this to be a short video, and now look where we are. The devs are already hard at work on patch 2, which won't likely contain thermodynamic mechanics. We probably won't see those for another couple of patches, but yes, they say it will be another few weeks until the next one, but honestly, with the amount of work gone into this patch, I really don't mind. They've turned the game from a laggy, buggy, near unplayable mess into something I'm actually quite enjoying right now. And that's just from one patch. There are still obviously many issues, such as no thrust to weight ratio per stage, amongst other basic quality of life features missing from Kerbal Space Program 1, but for now we have mods like stage info that add that functionality back. But yeah, one step at a time. I've linked the statement from Nate Simpson outlining what future updates may bring, but overall, I'm incredibly impressed with the work already done, and cannot wait for the next update. A big thanks to Mr. Bluestar, Pentium, So Not The Hero Type, That Unreal Guy, Zaretya, and the rest of my patrons and members for their continued support. I've been Karnasa, like and subscribe for more, and I will see you later.